Yisruni Chil Yoisai. Shivisi Adonai Linegdi Samit Kimimini Balemoit. Lochein Samach Libi Vayogel Kivoidi Af Bisori Ishkoin Lo Betach. Ki lo isazohi nafshi lishoy lo isitein chasidecha liroi shokas. Toidieni oirachayim soivas machois es ponecha nimois bimincha netzach. Ashrei oish asher lo yolach batzas rishoyim uv'derech hatoim lo yomod u'moishav leitzim lo yoshov. Ki b'soiras Adonai cheftzoi u'b'soiraso yege yemam v'loila. Yo ki eit shosul al palgim oyim asher piryo yitein vitoi v'oleu lo yiboil v'choil asher yaseh yatzliach. Loichein oroshoyim kim kamoi asher titfen ruach. Al kein lo yakumu rishoyim b'mishpat v'chatoim b'adas tzadikim. Ki yodei Adonai derech tzadikim v'derech rishoyim toiveit.
Chanukah and Rosh Chodesh are Yomim Sheim Aspidim, days when Hesped is also. Chutz mei Talmud Chacham b'fanav, the exception is for a Talmud Chacham. The Chvoid HaTorah, Hesped is mutter. Rav Nosson Nata Yitzchak ben Zev was Adam Gadol. Yiddishkeit is what it is in this city because of him. Torah flourishes in this city and has for many decades because of him. Yeshivas, Koilalim, Moistis in Eretz Yisrael, and all over were able to function because of him. Kvoid HaTorah permits a hesped even on Chanukah and Rosh Chodesh for such a Adam Choshev, such a Adam Gadol. However, the halacha is we have to be mekatzer, we have to be brief. We can't speak in the nigun of hesped so as not to be ma'orer the tzibur lebechi. Only divrei shvach about the nifter and the soirer, the mishpacha, to be mamshech darkei b'derech Hashem. A few years ago, I came to him with a sefer. He looked at it and gave a krechts. And he said, what What am I going to bring to the Rebbeinu Shloim when I go to the Derech Doiloi HaEmes? I pointed to his checkbook, which was nearby. I said, you wrote something far greater. You wrote hundreds of svarim with thousands and thousands of pages. He picked up his checkbook. He said, Du bist gerecht. I'm going to tell the Rebbeinu Shloim that in this world I wrote checks. And he did it with Mesiras Nefesh. There was one year, it was around Pesach time, where he fell and broke his ribs. He was in terrible pain, excruciating pain. I know because I had to help him get dressed. He could barely move. He was shaking from pain. That Sunday, it was Bein Hazmanim. I was going back to yeshiva. I went in to say goodbye. It was a Sunday. He was sitting in his study. Kabbalas Kahal. Mishulachim coming in and writing checks. He couldn't move. He couldn't get one arm into his shirt. The Mesiras Nefesh. Grandpa, you encouraged us throughout your life to learn Sifrei Musar, especially Mesilas Yesharim, which you yourself finished countless times. By our bar mitzvah, we got a shas with instructions to use it. By our chasana, we got a Mesilas Yesharim and LEVAYA with instructions to use it. But I had a better Sefer Musar. You were my Sefer Musar. Your life was a Sefer Musar. Something that us in the Hofstedter Mishpacha have to learn and study. Everything you did and the way you did it in your life is the biggest Sefer Musar for us to learn. Throughout your life, you yearned for the Geula. Now, with your tremendous chosim that you've accomplished throughout your life, be a Melitz Yosher for us and for Klal Yisrael to be Mekar of the Geula. Mocha Hashem Elokim Timah Me'al Kopan.
As Zev said, it is Chanukah and we're not supposed to be masbid. So I'll try to put some words in the context, the history of a community and a generation. My parents arrived in Toronto in 1948, refugees, Holocaust survivors, penniless, not knowing the language. Although blessed, at least my grandfather, one of their parents, survived, but initially remained in Hungary. They were, as were others, young couples on their own in their 20s, orphans, trying to find their ways. What remains incomprehensible to all of us is how these young couples survived unspeakable horrors, but also how they had the tenacity and commitment to build businesses, careers, families, shuls, schools, and countless community moistas, struggling in a foreign world all on their own. A real Chanukah story. the few against the mighty, unsurmountable obstacles, starting with a small light and making it grow and grow. This shul, which we are sitting in today, is part of that achievement. My father and mother moved here with us in 1954 to what was basically all farmland. Together with all other young couples, and from totally different backgrounds, hardly speaking the same language, Polish people, Germans, Hungarians, and some Canadians, they found ways to work together, pull the million out of the basement, remember folding chairs every Motzei Shabbos, and building this shul phase by phase, bringing Chashuv Rabbanim throughout its history. My father was committed to building his business. His very first office was in the basement of our home on Yeoman's. Every Motzei Shabbos, promptly after Havdalah, he was back at his desk, not a minute wasted. H&R ultimately became a leader in the real estate industry and spawned for children and grandchildren opportunities as we continued to build. Early in the start of building this family, chinuch, our education, became a primary focus, if not almost the primary focus. My parents took a very unconventional approach in 1959, when I was 9 years old, to send me to Israel without any family for 3 months to my aunt Alaa Shalom. So it's to learn Hebrew. In 1959, there was hardly an English-speaking person around in Eretz Yisrael. Of course, I had a Rebbe to learn with daily. That went without question. I returned to Toronto Labor Day, speaking Hebrew and starting to actually think in Hebrew. My father always said the well-known story, Hamayr Lebavak Alav Shalom, pulled him in his 30s into developing the Ner Yisrael Yeshiva. As Meyer told him, you will grow with your commitment more than you realize. From that involvement grew a total devotion to creating a Machzikei Torah for his boys. The challenge of chinuch, of building Torah, became the very staple of our Shabbos table conversations every single week. He lived and breathed Ner Yisrael. Together with others of the surviving generation, they would build this Torah city. In short order, they made Beis Yaakov a priority, as well as the other institutions. Somehow, the community mikvah, while less challenging in certain respects than chinuch, became our family's responsibility. Secretaries at H&R were used to replenish supplies. Property managers organized repairs. The mikvah became part and parcel of what they did. The Ner Tamid burned in the Mikdash continuously day and night. The Ner HaMaravi symbolizes the Shekhinah, the eternal light of Torah. But that light needs a nourishment. That light has to be kindled from somewhere else as well. The source of that light comes from the Mizbeach HaChifa. The light burning on the Mizbeach was used to kindle the Ner Tamid. It is the light of avodah, the light of commitment and devotion that creates the light of Torah. That is the Mizbeach Chitzon of my father and his generation. That created what we all have here for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren. When my mother passed away and my father sought to remarry, he met Irene. And being a Hofstedter, being a pragmatist, in his proposal, he told her, Irene, I'm an aging man. I have maybe 6 or 7 years, but you will know how to take care of me. Well, Dad, you were wrong. You and Irene were given 16 years, and you had a loving and devoted marriage. Irene, I want to thank you. Just this past Friday night, when Dad was in the hospital, and we didn't know that he'd be taken to ICU. I went over to wish you good Shabbos, and as usual, you were sitting at the table, dressed like a queen. And you said to me, I loved your mother so much. I wish I were sitting here as her guest. You knew how to balance love and commitment and devotion to my father and the role of Zivik Sheni. We all love you. I'd like to thank so many people who have been involved with the Richus Yom and the health of my father. It goes without saying, Elena, Michelle, Richard, the devotion that you gave him and the care is unbelievable. And to Dr. Kenny Greenwald, Dr. Sapir, Shelley, and all members of Hatzalah, and the amazing Chaim Weinberger. We don't know what we've done without all of you. My father was Nifter, Shabbos Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh, at the time of Shalosh Shudas. At the same time, David Melech was Nifter. He deserved the Torah at such a time. He was Malchus. God, I ask Mechila from you for anything that may have caused you sorrow over the years. May you be a Melit Yosher for the family, Gila, and Lamavit Nessa.
I think that perhaps the best way to describe my father, Shalom, is that he was an Ish Tom V'Yasher. He lived a pure and honest life with a high standard of morals and integrity. He valued and lived by common decency, strong, unbending Jewish traditions and values, a deep sense of emunah to Kodesh Baruch Hu, and a rich and rewarding family life. He was devoted to our mother, Shalom, and together they built a family that was filled with a strong conviction to accomplish and succeed through hard work, but with happiness and love, a life of Torah and Gemilas Chasadim. He never once complained about the great difficulties he lived through, both during the war and the many years that they took so loving care of our mother, Shalom, during her long illness, enduring so much in his life with strength and fortitude after the horrors of Europe. A life lived as a tremendous act of defiance in the wake of the senseless hatred that took so much from him. This was this ultimate Nekumat to Hitler, the Nachshman. Loved and admired by his family, friends, and business associates, my father was a charming, decent, kind, and generous man whose reputation preceded him in every way. His many accomplishments, both in the business world and the world of the cloud, are testament to his leadership skills and abilities. He was a true leader. After our mother's Petira 17 years ago, my father remarried, and it was Irene that gave him the strength to pick up and live on, never as a challenge to the memory of our mother, but as a loving partner in the last chapters of his life. May she be zeichet to many years of good health and happiness. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Beis Bechira, Shleish Neviim Olvim Im Agoyla, Echad Heid Lehem Al Bakum HaMizbech, Vechad Heid Lehem Al Mistoisav, Vechad Lehem Shemakrivim Al Mizbech, Hazet Kol HaKavanas Av B'Shein Shambayis. There were three Neviim were required to teach us the size, the place, and the use of Mizbech without a base of Mikdash. But the Rambam continues, Midas Archa, Midas Rachoi, Midas Kamasa, Edom Aktiv. The exact dimensions of the Mizbech are less important. There are two aspects to build a Mizbech. As a Mizbech by itself, the size is not critical. However, the Mizbech is also part of the base Mikdash, and in this capacity, it must be exact. If it is the wrong size, then it affects everything else in the Mikdash. The completeness of the base Mikdash is more than just the sum of its parts. So too, there exists in the individual, the community, and all of Klal Yisrael. One needs to be complete within oneself, and only the individual, and only then can the individual become part of the community that together make up Klal Yisrael. My father Shalom exemplified the meaning of a complete person, a leader in his community and a leader in Klal Yisrael. He will be dearly missed.
As was mentioned earlier, the focus of the Hespedim, Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh, and Chanukah are very much mitzumtzum. We really restrict it. I'd like to begin by asking Mechila from all of those. My father, Hareni Kaporos Mishkova, touched so many people, touched so many institutions and organizations. So many people were affected by him, and he affected so many in the most positive way. But I can only focus my remarks very narrowly on the primary function of his life, which was to be Marbitz Torah, Kovada Torah, building Torah, the impact that he had in the Torah world. Ha'itzer Hashem Elokim en Adoma kol chayes esorev es kol eifa shamayim v'yovel ha'adom lirois ma yikra loi v'chol asher yikra loi ha'odom nefesh chaya hu shemer. Adam Arishan gave names. He gave names to all of the creatures, to all that existed in the world. He gave them names. What is a name? Names change, places change, people change. Adam Arishan gave a name. What does that mean? The name that Adam Arishan gave was what the essence of their nature was. That's who they were, that's what they were, that's what their tafkid was, that's what they represented, and those names are enduring. Those names are the essence, the mahus of those briyas. Those are the names that Adam Harishan gave. The Shlach Kodesh says, when you find a name that's written the same way, frontwards and backwards, then the person that has that name has the koyach, he has the ability, he has the koyach to be ma'ached, to bring together diverse elements, to bring together from one cause of one extreme to the other, to bring them together, to join them together, fuse them together in the middle, to be ma'ached them together. Rav Nosson Notzu Yitzchak ben Razev, Hareni Kaparas Mishkova. The word name Nosson starts with a nun and it ends with a nun. It's read frontwards and backwards as Nosson. David ben Yishai, David Amelech, David ben Yishai. David is read David frontwards and backwards. Yishai is read Yishai frontwards and backwards. David ben Yishai was Melech Yisrael, the enduring Melech Yisrael, the Koyach HaMalchus, the strength of Malchus, the ability to join together against Klal Yisrael, all of Klal Yisrael, to bring them together, Tachas Malchus Shamayim, to elevate, to be Machzikei to Merayim, Klal Yisrael. David HaMelech was Nimshach, he had the Mashiach, he was Nimshach by Nosson Hanavi, read frontwards and backwards. That's the Koyach of Malchus, that's the Koyach of David ben Yishai, who is Nimshach by Nosson Hanavi, and Moshiach ben David will have the Koyach to be Ma'achet Klal Yisrael, to bring together Klal Yisrael, Tachas Kampei Ashpina, to be Merayim them, to bring them higher, to bring them as an Am Hashem. The Koyach of a Nosson. My father had the Koyach of a Nosson. He was the ultimate giver. He survived the Holocaust. My mother, alayhi shalom, they survived, but in the true sense of survivors. They came penniless, and they came broken, and they came and they rebuilt. They came and they gave. They gave to the community, they gave to their families, they gave. What my father was able to give was not only financial support. He came after the Holocaust, which so few were able. He came with optimism, with energy, with passion, with excitement. He came with the Amunah, Tahara of the Hayim. He brought that with him. He survived with that and was able to inject that. into the community, into the city at a time when there was very, very, very little over there. And he brought that passion and optimism and bitoch. And people wanted to be with him. People attached themselves to him. People wanted to be his partner. People wanted to be his friend. Sometimes he needed partners, sometimes he didn't. He took in partners. He helped people. As he was trying to rebuild his own business, he helped people. He helped people in all kinds of ways. He himself was struggling. He guaranteed their bank loans. He gave them business advice. He helped them get on their feet. And people turned to him. People wanted to be with him. And he helped them and he gave. He gave in so many rich and varied ways. He helped people with shalom bayis. People used to come to him. In those days, the infrastructure of the community, of the world, there was very little. They came to Mr. Hofstedter. They came to Mr. Hofstedter for advice. Probably in our world, something that we can't really fathom. But who did they come? They had a shalom bayis problem. They came to Mr. Hofstedter. So what did they say? What did he say to them? So that he would complain, a husband would complain, you know what she did, you know what she said, you know what? He said, you're right. He said, you're right. This is sugar, but you're right. You're going to throw everything away. You're going to ruin your children. You're going to ruin your family. You're going to ruin everything because you're right about this narishkeit. Forget about it. The person would go away feeling embarrassed, feeling humiliated. What's this narishkeit he's going to throw away his whole life? And he helped build this shul over here. When the community was small, I needed a shul. And how was he going to build a shul like this? How was he going to build a shul like this 50 years ago? So he had a plan, called a board meeting, called 10 people. Each one was going to sign on a loan. They were going to guarantee the loan, and they were going to be able to build a shul. So one of the members of the shul, one of the members of the board who didn't go through the Holocaust, who didn't go through the poverty in Europe, had a relatively comfortable life in Canada, and knew from stability and safety and prudence, and you saved your money and you didn't take risks, and you didn't take your risks for Torah either, had a different viewpoint. And there was a struggle, but the shul got built. One time I remember I was a young boy, I came to shul, it was Erev Shabbos, it was a summer month, and I came to shul, my father was holding my hand, we came to the front door, there was a elderly person there standing outside, and he had his grandchild with him, and he told his grandchild, shake this man's hand. Shake this man's hand. He's a lucky man, his luck will rub off on you. So my father said, unlucky man. He told his grandson, yeah, he's a lucky man, shake his hand. Afterwards, I asked my father, what was that all about? He said, when we were building the shul, and we had our board meetings, and this man, he stood up and he said, Mister, we're going to sign on the bank loan. Mister, you're crazy. But of course, my father, with his persistence and energy, determination, the force of his personality and conviction, won the day. They got these people to sign, they built a shul, and this man, to his last day, thinks that my father was lucky. Not realizing that with Mesiras Nefesh, there's Siyata D'Shmaya. And it didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. None of it made sense. Building the shul didn't make sense. Building Eretz Yisrael didn't make sense. None of it made sense, but it made perfect sense. Because he lived through a life of Mesiras Nefesh and Siyata D'Shmaya where the impossible becomes possible. Ner Yisrael. What can be said about Yeshivas Ner Yisrael? He gave his life, he gave his neshama to Ner Yisrael. Morning and night, building yeshiva. He himself had only a very few years to learn yeshiva under Shmuel Schwartz himself. But it was imbued with him the emes of Yireh Shamayim. The Yireh Shamayim, the commitment to Torah. And he lived Ner Yisrael with passion. And it's hard to imagine for our children, our grandchildren especially, what that meant. It was about the only yeshiva in Canada. When people didn't want to send to yeshiva, and people didn't see the need for yeshiva. I'm not only talking yeshiva gedolah, I'm not talking like kollel. Kollel didn't exist in Toronto at that time. There was no kollel. There was even hardly a Beis Yaakov just started. But even yeshiva gedolah, there was no yeshiva gedolah. Even high school, yeshiva katana. And building Ner Yisrael didn't just mean writing a check, didn't just mean raising money. It meant talking to parents, trying to convince them of the importance, not of this yeshiva, the importance of sending your son to a yeshiva. If you don't send your son to yeshiva, there'll be no continuity. And how many we saw in the city that there wasn't. It meant trying to convince mothers of potential students in Ner Yisrael that the food really was good. My father had to speak and through the night and talk to them. No, it's not too oily. Don't worry, their complexion will be fine. They'll find a shidduch. Don't worry. That's what it meant to build Ner Yisrael. Endless discussions on these types of matters. And of course, the financial drain while he was trying to build up businesses. What greater sight with the pride and joy of this community, the jewel and the crown of this community, to see on a Sunday morning, a winter Sunday morning, with the snow blowing, freezing cold, the two shutfim, the Holocaust survivors, Toronto's Gvirim, my father, and Yibor L'chaim, my shver, Rosein Gesund, Rabbi Avram Bleeman Shlita, going in the snow, knocking on doors from door to door, trying to raise money for the yeshiva, trying to convince people to come to the yeshiva. What greater pride for this city, and that the community was built on, that's what their Gvirim did. That their Gvirim, this was a Toronto Gvirim, that went, and sometimes the checks were tiny checks, sometimes the checks were big checks, didn't matter, because it was getting the people to be part of it, to join part of it. And that's what they did. They galvanized the people together to make it a community and a community involvement. But he had that same compassion for a yochid. All types of yochid, all types of individuals that flocked to him. In terms of support, I remember as a young boy, my father worked very, very hard. From morning to night, he was working hard. He barely had time to rest. He barely had time to eat. Supper was a 2-minute, 5-minute affair, and quickly downstairs to the den and back to work. One winter day, there was a knock on the door. This was in the early days before it was really common for Shalachim to come to town, for people to come to town. There's a knock on the door, and El Yid comes. My father welcomes him in. He doesn't have time to stop. He has to finish eating because he has to quickly run. So it's very cold, bitter cold. He invites the man in. He asks him, "Would you like a hot cup of tea?" He says, "No, thank you." And he says, "What would you like?" He says, "He's collecting money." So for who and for what? The man was a little embarrassed. He said, "For myself." He says, "What's the matter?" He says, "Can't make ends meet." So he asked him, "How much do you need?" The man was very embarrassed. He said, whatever you want to give. It's fine, whatever you want to give. Just tell me, what do you need? What do you need? So finally, reluctantly, the man said, he told him, this is what I need. So I thought very quickly, everything was done with Rizus. When he lived his life with this Rizus, he wrote out a check, gave it to the man. No problem. He looked at the check and he said, it's a mistake. I asked for half of this. He said, I know you asked for half of this. So why are you giving me double? He said, because I can see you're an Erel Chiyid. I can see you're an Erel Chiyid, and I want to help an Erel Chiyid. And that's the way he conducted himself. But people from all walks, Rosh Yeshivas used to love to speak to my father. They used to love to speak to my father. I remember one of the Gedolim, from a pretty good dar in America. He told one of his Talmidim, he was speaking to Mr. Hofstedter, and Mr. Hofstedter gave him the Ageres Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and he never saw it before, and he was so spoiled, and he got this from Mr. Hofstedter from a Balabas. I got the Ageres Rabbi Akiva Eiger from a Balabas. He was so spoiled. I met a few years ago one of the Rabbanim, a Chodesh Rabbanim in Lakewood, with Talmud of Rav Aaron Zatzal, and he asked me, how's your father? I always love speaking to your father. He tells me about the Haim. He tells me about the way the life was. So I suggested, it's a Pesach to the world of the Chassam Sofer. He says, no, it's, you lived the life of the Chassam Sofer. You were able to talk to you about the Haim, and you felt you were living the Chassam Sofer. He used to love so much to speak. Just recently, a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, I was at a simcha. One of the Rebbeim, the current Rebbeim from Eretz Yisrael, came over to me and he said, asked, how's your father? And he said, I so much miss. He's like, your father used to come up Sunday mornings. He used to come up Sunday mornings to yeshiva, which yeshiva does I miss when the board of directors comes up. He said, I so much miss your father used to come. He used to come and used to give such a chashivas and inject so much energy in the yeshiva and see such a push of Mr. Hofstedter is coming up there discussing with Mr. Bleeman. It was such an event when he used to come. It was an honor for people to associate with Mr. Hofstedter. It was an honor and a privilege for people to be on the same board with Mr. Hofstedter. It was an honor and a privilege to be a partner with Mr. Hofstedter. And it was an honor, a duty, a privilege to serve as his son. He used to instruct in many things in his life. There were many things in his life that he used to instruct on, many things in his life that he used to feel strongly about. But in his later years, all that he discussed was Torah. He never asked about business. He never asked about what's going on in the world. None of that seemed important. All that seemed to be important and all that was important was Torah. In later years, he used to tell me. He used to tell me with tears in his eyes. And he says, he used to tell me from the bottom of his heart, never stop learning. Never stop learning. When you're old, never stop. You don't know. You don't realize. It's not everybody that can learn. It's not everybody that has the skills to learn. a person is able to learn, cherish it, never leave it, never stop learning. Zeik dover hakol nishra, es Elokim yarei v'ashmitzveisav shmaya, ki zeh kol ha'adam. This is all of what man is. Years of the king, keeping the mitzvahs. The pasuk doesn't say this is the tachlis of everyone. It says zeh kol ha'adam. This is the entire person. Not what he does. It's not one of the things he does. It's not one of his responsibilities. It is him. If a person lives his life, and that this is his priority, if he lives a life that this Torah is all that is meaningful to him, then he becomes a shtik Torah. Then that kol ha'adam, that's what he is. My father built great buildings. He built businesses. He built edifices, created subdivisions, created all kinds of amazing things, noteworthy things, and great things in his life. And they endure. But at the end of his day, all that was meaningful, all that was important, all that he cared about was the inevitable Hashem. Build his Torah, that his family should continue, and his family should be raised and nurtured in that way. To be a maliciation for all of us together with my mother, Lord Shalom. Hey, Nashet Tzur and Tzur HaChaim.
Es nishmas shivnos matavit chok ben yotzeh sheholach li'olamai Bavo shebli neder amishpacha talk about as far as nishmasai Ikan eide deibenu chasai Ochem balor rachamim Yastirei v'zezer kenafav li'olamim V'yitzor b'torah chayim es nishmasai Adonai u'nachalasai V'yonuach b'shalom ha'mishkavai V'noimar amen
LEVAYA will go from here to the airport and directly to Yerushalayim. LEVAYA in Yerushalayim will leave from Beit Knesset, Maran Harim, Rechav, Shalom Sivan 2, and Ramot Efeshesh. For the Avelim staying here, Shiva will begin immediately. Mincha Ma'ariv this evening will be at 4:30 and the whole week. Shachris will be at 7:30. Mincha on Friday will be at 2 o'clock. Ask please let the Avelim go out in the family first. Shiva here will be at 43 Yorkdowns Drive.
Good afternoon, good morning, actually. My name is Akiva Balter. On behalf of Misaskim, the Clanton Park Chevra Kadisha, and the Hofstedter family, I want to thank you all for joining us on Zoom or live stream or on the phone to give a kavod achron to Sandy Hofstedter, who is an institution on his own in this city. I don't think that there is an individual who collectively, with any organization, did not benefit from his benevolence and his generosity in one way, shape, or form. As Rav David mentioned, the foundation of Ner Yisrael here in Toronto. If we're going to keep the room open for a few moments, if anybody would like to speak, or at least write some notes to the family in the chat box that we can pass on, we're going to keep the room open for another 10 minutes. If somebody wants to unmute and they're bold enough to do that, I'm going to ask our associate producer to allow people to unmute and say a few words, then by all means do so. Once again, my name is Akiva Balter, and we should meet of Simchas on behalf of Misaskim, Clanton Park, the Chevra Kadisha, and Hofstedter family. Thank you so much for joining us.